afternoon. The first witness this afternoon is Dr. Anne McVeigh, who would wish to affirm.
Yes, very well. Dr. McVeigh, would you just repeat after me, and if you're kind enough just to stand as you do that? I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. McVeigh.
Just take this opportunity to say something I perhaps overlooked saying this morning about mobile phones and photography. When the inquiry is sitting, would everyone please ensure that their mobile phone has either been turned off or put on silent or vibrate? And I must also remind you that no photography of any sort is permitted anywhere inside the premises or within the perimeter wall. That includes using mobile phones, tablets, and anything else. Yes.
Yes, Dr. McVeigh, good afternoon. First of all, can I express the thanks of the inquiry for an extremely detailed and helpful statement which you have provided to the inquiry, which I'm going to go through very shortly with you. And if you were present when I opened this module of evidence to the inquiry, you'll realise that quite a large part of that opening was informed by chunks of your statement, so for that I'm particularly grateful. I hope you don't mind that I quoted you verbatim in that. If we could just look at this statement, please. It's at AUS 0147. And can I just ask you to confirm that this is the statement that you provided to the inquiry, Doctor?
It is, yes.
If we just go to the last page of that, which is AOS 0173. And that's your signature, and that's dated the 29th of July 2014, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Now if we go back to page AUS 0147, just if I can just go through the statement with you, not in reading it out in detail, but just to indicate what areas you've covered in it and maybe ask for a little more detail on certain matters,
That's fine, yeah.
if I may. It records there that in paragraphs 1 and 2 you set out your personal background, and you're currently a part-time employee of the Public Record Office for Northern Ireland. And back in 1995, you submitted a PhD thesis to the Queen's University of Belfast, which was entitled A History of the Child and Juvenile Migration Schemes to Australia.
That's correct.
And that was accepted and you were awarded the Doctor of Philosophy. Now, that piece of body of work was very much an academic treatise, is that correct?
Yes, it was.
And I take it, and correct me if I've got any of this wrong, but I take it that you were drawing on the wealth of material that was available at that time to inform that thesis.
That's right.
And did you have much involvement with anyone personally, for example, any of the child migrants themselves?
Very, very little, if at all.
And you have, at our request, provided the statement which essentially sets out some of the background information relating to the origin and nature of the child migration schemes from the UK and in particular to Australia, although you do go into detail about the other countries to which children were migrated. And in paragraph 2 you set out the libraries and so forth that you relied upon for the thesis. And we do have a copy of your thesis, which you may have heard is electronically in the bundle and can be accessed by any of the other legal participants in the inquiry who need to see it. Now, from paragraphs 3 through to paragraph 24 of your statement, you set out a detailed history of the various child migrant schemes. And I'm not going to go through all of those, but if we could just go to paragraph 11, please, which is
Big Brother movement.
It's page AUS 0150. And if I can just read out from that, I spoke this morning and said a little bit about the Big Brother movement. And you record that the Big Brother movement was founded by Robert Linton, an Australian in 1925. He believed that Australia required clean living, well-mannered British boys with grit and determination. And he decided that an organisation that would undertake to stand in loco parentis would overcome parental concerns and lead to an increase in youth migration. He enlisted the support of several influential citizens, such as the Prime Minister of Australia and the Premier of New South Wales, and the organisation was launched in London on the 14th of July 1925. And you then go on to talk about the fact that it guaranteed to find employment and accommodation for each young man to be his legal guardian until the age of 21. And we have heard that there were some boys who did go from Northern Ireland on foot of the Big Brother movement. Had you any involvement with any of those? Or was this all this information came from documentary material, is that correct?
It did, yes, archival sources.
And another organisation or scheme, as it were, was the one run by Fairbridge Society. If we look at paragraph 13, if we can just scroll down through your statement, and you say that its brief was to send children, not necessarily orphans, from the workhouses, the orphanages and overcrowded city streets to Australia. The children were not to be fostered out but brought up in a farm school where they would be taught to be Antipodean farmers and farmers' wives. And you then go on to talk about Kingsley Fairbridge himself was a Rhodesian. And we do know that some children went from the UK to Rhodesia. Is that the first place where the Fairbridge Society operated?
No, it didn't ever actually operate in Rhodesia. The Rhodesian government weren't keen on the idea at the time, claiming that the country was too young itself to look after young migrants. He did look at Canada as well, but he settled on Australia as being much more suitable.
Okay. And then at paragraph 16, if we can just scroll down again. And forgive me for skimming over a lot of what is very pertinent and important detail, but it can, you can take it that the inquiry panel has had the opportunity of reading it, and in fact have had the opportunity of reading your entire thesis, so they're very familiar with what is in your statement, Doctor. You talk about Dr. Barnardo's in paragraph 16, and you say that first sent children to Western Australia in 1883, and but the official start really would have been in 1920s and 1921 when it bought premises in Sydney and New South Wales as a home for children, and then opened several more homes until there were 9 in total. And if we could just scroll down to the next paragraph. The children, and if they did have parents, weren't expected to make any financial contribution to being sent out by Dr. Barnardo's, is that correct?
As far as I could ascertain, yes.
And you also then at paragraph 18 talk about a number of Christian denominational bodies, such as the National Children's Home, which had its origins in Methodism, as being another society that would have sent children out to various countries. And although you say that migration to Australia was not organised as a policy, it was an option for those young people who expressed that preference.
That's right.
And if I can just pause there, because we have spoken, or I have spoken this morning about children and young people, and it's clear that from the documentation that we have examined, the inquiry has examined, there was a wide age range of children who were migrated from Northern Ireland in particular, some as young as 5, some right up to the age of about 17, and obviously there were different schemes within those age groups operating. And I just wondered if you wished to make, when I was speaking to you earlier, you made a comment about the distinction between the age groupings, and if you wanted to expand upon that at this point.
Lovely. Yes, I called it the child and juvenile schemes because the distinction being that a juvenile was anyone over the age of 14, because at the time 14 was an acceptable age to leave school and get a job. So you could have been on the workforce from the age of 14. These were mainly, the juveniles I was looking at, were mainly people who chose of their own volition to go. They approached the various organisations. Sometimes they paid their own fare or had it paid for them. And they went there with the option of going to work. The younger children, the child migration schemes, were different. They were the younger children under 14 who would have been in the care of an institution or a parent or. But either they would have been too young to work, so someone would have made the decision on their behalf.
So in the material that you were examining in preparation for your thesis, there was a clear distinction between those who were 14 and over,
Yes.
and who had the capacity, as it were, to make an informed decision about whether or not they wanted to go to Australia. Was
Yes.
that your understanding?
Yes.
And but the younger children, that decision was made for them.
Yes, I would say so. Although their consent was part of the request, it's not always evident that the children knew what they were consenting to.
Then in paragraph 22, if we scroll down, you talk about the involvement, and I'm passing over the involvement of other church denominations, but you'll appreciate that the involvement of the Roman Catholic Church was particularly relevant because the vast majority of those who have spoken to us came from Catholic homes in Northern Ireland. And you say there that in common with most religious organisations, the Roman Catholic Church has a long tradition in both education and childcare. From the earliest times, Roman Catholic nuns were involved in the running of orphanages, in the care of distressed mothers, and in the training of young girls. Roman Catholic priests and brothers were prominent in the field of education. Some fraternities were founded primarily as teaching orders, of which the Christian Brothers are probably the best known in Ireland. As well as those in holy orders of one form or another, some Roman Catholic lay people were involved in church activities, particularly in regard to the care of children. And if I can just continue on to paragraph 23, by the middle of the 19th century, this resulted in a plethora of Roman Catholic homes, all working along similar lines but without any central control. In 1901, amalgamation of a number of homes in and around London resulted in the formation of the Crusade of Rescue and Homes for Destitute Catholic Children, known as the Crusade of Rescue. And if I may just pause there, some of the documentation that I referred to this morning does talk about the Crusade of Rescue in that documentation, particularly, I think, when Brother Conlon was writing to Canon Craven.
Mm-hmm.
But it claimed that no Catholic children really destitute or in danger with regard to their faith and for whom no other provision could be made would be refused admission to our homes. That essentially was the ethos of the Catholic institutions in the UK, an open door policy, as it were. And if we may just scroll down a little bit more. You set out here in more detail than what I opened to the inquiry this morning, the involvement or how the Catholic Church came to be involved in migration schemes, and that began in 1901 in a formal capacity. Father Banns was appointed as first administrator and secretary of the organisation. That's the Crusade for Rescue. In 1919, he was succeeded by later Canon Craven, and it was Canon Craven who initiated the Australian Migration Scheme. Father Banns had been both president and treasurer of the Catholic Emigration Association, which was formed in October 2003 by the merger of the Canadian Catholic Emigration Society based in Southwark and the Catholic Emigrating Association based in Liverpool. But this association limited itself to sending children to Catholic homes in Canada. Then you go on to talk about just before the Second World War in 1937, we see the involvement of Brother Conlon, and he seems to have featured quite prominently in the Catholic schemes for emigration to Australia.
Yes, indeed, he was one of the prime movers.
You say that Canon Craven was approached by Brother Conlon, acting on behalf of the Christian Brothers in Western Australia, concerning the feasibility of sending youngsters from Roman Catholic homes in the UK to Christian Brothers establishments in Australia. Following discussions with officials from the United Kingdom Dominion's Office and with members of the Roman Catholic hierarchy, with the approval of Bishop Bernard Griffin, then Auxiliary Bishop of Birmingham and later as Cardinal Griffin, Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, it was agreed that Canon Craven should sign an agreement between the Dominion's Office and the Catholic Emigration Association. If we may scroll on down. And he set out there the terms of the agreement. Canon Craven was the general administrator, and he had to present quarterly accounts to the Dominion's Office. This was essentially a very structured agreement, isn't that correct? It was very detailed, and there was, it obviously wasn't a legislative scheme, but it was certainly a very regulated scheme.
Yes.
The new organisation was to be known as the Catholic Child Migration Scheme Australia, officially came into existence in May 1938. Nazareth houses throughout the United Kingdom were canvassed for boys between the ages of 7 and 12 who would be interested in going to Australia. and you talk about the first group of boys setting sail on the SS Stratherd on the 8th of July 1938, and then another group on 8 days later. And you say that St. Peter's Net, which was a Roman Catholic magazine, reported the occasion. For 50 years, the Christian Brothers of Western Australia have been building up an organisation for poor boys that has now reached a state of excellence not excelled anywhere in the Empire. And it is to these up-to-date religious of Western Australia that the young citizens of the Empire are now speeding. They will be trained for whatever trade they show most aptitude, and when fit for labour for themselves will be settled either on farms of their own or set up in life as independent tradesmen. And you then report that the boys went to one of 5 Christian Brothers schools in Western Australia: Subiaco, Castledare, Clontarf, Bindoon and Tardun. And you also relate then about preparation being made for girls being sent out. And it's our intention to send out girls as well as boys to Western Australia, and we have recently had the satisfaction of learning that Sisters of Nazareth have begun the erection of a Nazareth house in Geraldton, which is near Perth in Western Australia, I believe, the object of which will be to prepare girls for a farming career. This new development is of the greatest importance. It will enable us to keep brothers and sisters in touch with each other, make it possible for girls to follow a career other than that of domestic service, and enable them to become useful wives to Catholic farmers. And this was all prior to World War II that these schemes were put in place. We know from what happened then that World War II effectively put an end to immigration.
Obviously, yes. Yeah.
And in fact, I'm not sure if I've got this from what you said, but certainly it's somewhere in the documentation it's recorded that one of the reasons for that was they actually did try to emigrate some children during the war years, but there was
a scheme known as Children's Overseas Resettlement Board, which tried to, it was almost like an extension of the evacuation programme, so that people would have been evacuated from the larger towns into the countryside. This was a way of getting children out to the Dominions and to other friendly countries. It was a popular scheme. There was over 200,000 applicants for this, but very shortly into the scheme, a ship was sank that carried some of the child migrants, and they stopped the scheme after that. That was the only wartime.
Yes. Certainly, I thought I had got that from either it might have been in your thesis rather than your statement, but
was that the SS Benares?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Yes, it was a major wartime tragedy. A very large number of children drowned, I understand.
Yeah, and some of the helpers as well. It was bad.
So that really effectively put an end for any migration of children during the war years.
Yeah.
And then after the war, Brother Conlon came back to England trying to resurrect the scheme that had been put in place pre-war. And you record at paragraph 29 and 30 the post-war situation that he came in 1947, and the result, there was 226 children from Catholic Child Rescue Society homes went to Australia under the protection of the Catholic Child Welfare Council. But it wasn't just Catholics who were promoting migration, and if we can scroll on down, we note this is a letter to Father Stinson, who I've indicated was the Australian end of the operation, as it were. He was involved in 2 bodies which were responsible for emigration at various times. And from the Catholic Child Welfare Council writing to him in 1953 saying, "It has been a muddled year, and I want to put on record that the Catholic Child Welfare Council does not hold itself responsible for future possible inquiries concerning those children whose emigration it did not sponsor. It would appear that at least 114 children from England and Wales were dealt with directly by yourself without reference to this office." So there seems to have been some ill feeling that non-Catholics effectively were being emigrated under the auspices of Father Stinson. Is that a fair comment?
I'm not quite sure about the religious denomination, but I think what it was the fact that they hadn't gone through the Catholic Welfare Society, that they wanted everything to go through that one headquarters, whereas he had just sort of taken it on himself.
To take some children anyway. So it's the Catholic Child Welfare Council was trying to keep a record of which children were being emigrated.
Yes.
but clearly there were children going from other sources.
That's right.
So that ceased as defined by the Catholic Child Welfare Council in 1956, and there was 930 children had migrated to Australia by that stage. Now you say juvenile migration still continued, and a number of young men between the ages of 14 and 18 were recruited through Roman Catholic organisations, notably the Federal Catholic Immigration Committees, usually came from family homes rather than institutions, and went straight to Tardun, the Agricultural Training College of the Christian Brothers. Altogether, the number of young people who migrated to Australia under the aegis of the Roman Catholic bodies amounted to over 1,000 between the years 1938 to 1966, and I think I gave the figure of 1,109, which would be in keeping with that. Yeah. Then in the next paragraphs from you talk about the other organisations, the religious organisations and societies which were involved in overseas migration. And you say for many years these institutions had facilitated, if not actively encouraged, the migration of their members. They gave help and advice to those thinking of settling in any of the dominions, but I take it we're talking about families who were migrating here rather than just single individual children.
Again, it would have been families and juveniles.
Those boys who'd expressed an interest when
Yes.
they left school that they wanted to go
Yes.
abroad. The organisations could be relied upon to help in every way possible, even to the extent of carrying advertisements in their newspapers. And then you do talk about the field of organised juvenile immigration, each religiously based organisation essentially replicating the work of others. Young children transferred between homes, and older children were trained in farm schools in Britain before continuing their education in Australia. For older youths who were ready to start work immediately, officers in the overseas branches arranged for employment, accommodation, supervision. And if we can just go on down. You talk about the arguments for and against, the rationale behind the schemes at paragraphs 35 through to 41. Now I did quote from this earlier on, so I'm not going to go over it again. But essentially there were three strands really to the rationale, if I can put it that way, and please correct me if I have got this wrong. There was, it was seen to be for the benefit of the child himself.
Yes.
Because he might have a better life in Australia. It was seen to be for the benefit of the community in both the UK, because the UK community could essentially, I don't want to use an emotive word, I'm trying to think of a neutral one, but they could dispose of a problem of accommodation for needy children in their own country.
It left more room in the institution at home too.
Yes. So they could free up more beds, as it were.
Yes, that's nice.
In modern terms, in the institutions in the UK to look after more children, and at the same time they were helping to populate the colonies with what has been described as good British stock.
Yes.
So there was the benefit to the community to which they were going also, and also increasing the labour pool in the community to which they were going. And then there was also the financial aspect of it, which seems to be the one thing that everybody felt was their main justification for this over the years, or the one justification that
well, the economic
lasted.
Argument was always strong, because no matter when and whatever period of history, it's trying to take care of destitute people, not just children, as economically as possible without burdening the ratepayer. That has always been the case, and it continues to be the case.
So it was cheaper to send the children off to another country rather than look after them in their own country?
Yes.
At paragraphs 42 to 44, you quote from the Curtis report, and I did read that out when I was going through the opening this morning. Paragraph 45, you make the point that the institutions in the UK relied on reports from those running the homes in Australia as to what was happening there. You say that in the period from 1930 to the early 50s, with travel between the two countries taking much longer than it does today, and telephone links uncertain, written reports were, perforce, the predominant means of contact. The parent agencies in Britain relied heavily on these dispatches for information on what was happening in their homes and schools in Australia. Writing the reports was normally the duty of the principal or head of the establishment. He or she would be required to send regular bulletins on all aspects of the home to interested parties back in Britain. Yet if someone was systematically abusing a position of trust or condoning abuses by other staff members, they were unlikely to state so in the report. Therefore, while a certain degree of trust had to be placed in the principal of the home or school in question, a safeguard was instituted in the form of periodic inspections by Australian state child welfare officials. Now, are you aware from the researches you did when those periods of inspections would have been initiated, when they may have started?
I can't recall the dates off the top of my head, but there had been inspections prior, but only one or two before the war years. They did become more common, much more
afterwards.
Thorough afterwards, yes.
And I think it's fair to point out that the foundation books for Geraldton, which is the girls' school outside Perth, run by the Sisters of Nazareth, those foundation books do actually record such visits of inspection by the Australian authorities. And then at paragraph 48 onwards, you speak about the various inspections which were carried out over the years. And if I just pause there, it was not until the child migration schemes recommenced just before the Second World War that serious attention was focused on the state of the establishments to which the children were being sent. A 1942 report on the Christian Brothers establishment at Tardun found the premises overcrowded and crammed with crammed dormitories, inadequate blankets, and a general lack of cleanliness. Ronald Cross, the inspector, was of the opinion that the principal, Brother Sanders, was unfitted for that office. In mitigation, however, the report added that the children did appear to be happy and healthy, and that the Australian children were treated in exactly the same way as the British migrants. Cross added that the cramped conditions were due to Tardun being the main evacuation centre for children from various other Christian Brother establishments. And it would appear to be the explanation being given for that particular home being overcrowded. And
one of the other homes owned by them was taken over by the RAAF, the Royal Australian Air Force, and the children from that had to be evacuated. So that was one of the reasons they claimed for the overcrowding.
So one home closed down and they just wholesale shipped those children over to Tardun. And you say that then the contrast between Tardun and other institutions was marked. Nazareth House Geraldton was considered good enough for our own boys, while the Fairbridge establishment was fresh, clean, homely, and had developed amenities in flowers, shrubs, and so on, and favourably impressed. And then it goes on to discuss the other homes. And in fact, if I may just scroll down slightly, it just said one of the other homes that the inquiry has heard about was Bindoon. And as far as Bindoon was concerned, the boys and residents there were more fortunately placed than those more comfortably circumstances. All three institutions, that's Tardun, Castledare and Bindoon, received excellent reports, the writer concluding, "In my opinion, the agreement signed by the controlling authority and the British government is being carried out to the letter." And you go on to talk about other reports then that there were, Garnett's report. And as a result of Garnett's report in 1994, the Roman Catholic officials were forced to concede that further investigation was necessary, and Canon Craven, representing the Catholic migration agencies, claimed it had always been intended that representatives of the Catholic Church should go out to Australia to inspect the Christian Brothers institutions, but that this intention had been stopped by the war. They were not satisfied with conditions of these institutions, and before they would allow any further children to go out to Australia, a visit would have to be paid to examine the conditions on the spot and ascertain that the deficiencies were remedied. And this represented their general attitude to the report, and they were grateful for having been supplied with it.
I think sorry. Just go back a bit. There's obviously a typing error there. I don't think it could be
earlier than 1994.
1944, perhaps.
Or 54.
But it would fit the time frame referred to if it was 44.
Yes, at 44 it would be just post-war then. So this Garnett's report would have been just before the resumption of emigration after the Second World War. Would that be right?
Can I just double check my thesis to see what that was? Because I really, it could have been 54, but
think it's most likely, as Chairman says, to be 1944, because if you look at paragraph 52 of your statement, it says when a visit was finally made in 1946, Castledare was considered very poorly equipped and the accommodation of very low standards. So I think it would be 44 is quite right. And it cannot be regarded at any rate in its present condition as suitable for United Kingdom children. You go on to say the investigators were also critical of Tardun, which is described as overcrowded, as we've indicated. And if I can scroll on down, please. Living conditions at Tardun are primitive. The boys are well fed and housed, but there's an entire lack of any comfort. On the other hand, the boys appear to be happy and healthy. They're intelligent, well-mannered, and evidently under excellent discipline. The schoolwork is good, and though it is considered that the migrant boys are approximately 6 months or so behind boys from private homes, it is admitted that the same is true of Australian boys who come from other institutions. Bindoon was found to be admirably equipped and situated, while the Nazareth House Geraldine was considered the flagship of the Catholic orphanages. In 1947, a number of other inspections of various homes were carried out, and there were further inspections in 48 and 49. And although these reports were critical of various aspects of individual homes, they were also complementary in some respects. And it is undeniable that in the early years, and particularly during World War II, several of the homes were overcrowded, amenities were inadequate, living conditions harsh, and home comforts scarce. In mitigation, it must be said the warm time exigencies forced many organisations to suffer. Certain commodities were in short supply, particularly building materials and labour. Clontarf had been commandeered, as you said, by the Air Force, forcing the evacuation of boys to homes already fully occupied. So there were, from that it's quite clear, and from the documentary evidence that you examined in preparation for your thesis from which you prepared your statement, it's quite clear that the Catholic authorities did inspect homes in Australia before re-engaging with the emigration schemes after the war.
Yes.
Although it would seem that they weren't particularly complimentary, those inspections, and yet children were still sent there.
I think there was still a thought that although the homes may not have been first class, they were still better than the homes they were in England or in Ireland.
And if we can scroll on down then, please, to paragraph, you talk about John Moss and his report, and if I can go on down then to paragraph 60. Just, if I may pause there, and although there is a name given here in your statement and it isn't redacted, it will be redacted before your statement is put on to the website. But you talk about comments made by a particular nun on behalf of the Sisters of Nazareth in Londonderry on the practice and need for child migration. Now, this was a conversation that you had with a nun. Can you just tell us a little bit about the circumstances of that conversation?
As part of the research, I was trying to get hold of as many people as possible, and I did phone the sister. She phoned me back and we chatted. Now, she did talk to me, and she did say she would find out what she could, and recalling events 20 years later is a bit difficult, but she did actually send me a letter which also outlined what she had said in the phone and mentioned some material she had found in the home.
And that material, I think this, from what you say, took place in 1992, this conversation.
Right, yes.
And this particular nun would have been superior at that time in Derry. And she told you that there was, on behalf of the sisters, what she told you was that this migration is a good opening for the boys, as so little work can be found in Northern Ireland at the present time. Mm-hmm. I take it that was something that she was quoting from herself, because if you're talking to her in 1992, migration had ceased many years previously, so she must have been talking about the view of the time that they were engaged in the migration schemes. And she also wrote that at that time there were 170 boys cared for in the home. It would have been seen as a positive step towards their future to avail of the opportunity to send some boys to Australia, where I understand at that time the work situation was bright. So the tenor of what she's saying to you is effectively, we thought we were doing the best for these boys. We thought we were sending them somewhere where they would have better opportunities of work. And that's consistent with the rationale that you discovered throughout these schemes?
I think that was the rationale behind the founding of all of the schemes. Although their economic consideration was very, very much forefront in the actual idea was that children could benefit. It would be the best thing for them, would be to go and take part in these schemes.
Now, at paragraph 63 through to 67, you quote from various materials, which, if I may summarise, they tend to suggest that there was an enthusiasm on the part of the Catholic agencies for child migration, albeit with certain caveats regarding consent and the like. Would that be a fair comment?
I would say it was. I think that's for several reasons. Obviously, the spread of the faith is always a big thing, but they did actually think they were doing their best for a lot of children in care.
And in paragraph 68 through to 71, you say that a common complaint by children sent under the child migrant scheme is that siblings were separated by gender on arrival. And you offer a partial explanation for this. You say that sometimes the state government required that, and certainly the government of New South Wales did. Mm-hmm. And was that the position in Western Australia, to your recollection?
No, Western Australia didn't have any such constraints, but the Western Australian homes were mainly run by the Catholic Church, and it was a normal practice at the time when children were young to keep them segregated. Most of the Catholic schools and so on would have had a boys' section and a girls' section. And even if you went to church on a Sunday, there'd be the boys' section and the girls' section. And they really did try and keep them separate. And I think this is just a continuation of that practice.
Well, can I just ask what the position was with regard to non-Catholic institutions? We can use maybe Fairbridge as an example.
Again, most of them had single-sex cottages that boys would be in one, up to 14 boys in one, and up to 14 girls in a second. They would have had an opportunity to mix outside, but their home as such would have been single sex.
So it would have been they would have been separated within the same home, as it were?
Yes.
And maybe for sleeping and eating, but mixing during the day at playtime and that kind of thing?
Yes, that sort of thing, yes.
If we can just scroll down, you say at paragraph 70 that from time to time the Roman Catholic authorities claimed a desire to keep brothers and sisters close to each other, and that can be seen from a statement published in the Roman Catholic periodical St. Peter's Net. It is our intention to send out girls as well as boys to Western Australia, and we have recently had the satisfaction of learning that the Sisters of Nazareth have begun the erection of Nazareth House in Geraldton. This new development is of the greatest importance. It will enable us to keep brothers and sisters in touch with each other, make it possible for girls to follow a career other than that of domestic service, enable them to become useful wives to Catholic farmers. I did read that out earlier. Yes, so it was, there was some understanding at this time that there was a need to keep brothers and sisters in contact with each other.
Yes, this was another thing that came across quite well. A lot of the immigration societies had an age barrier. You know, they didn't want children under 5, they didn't want them over a certain age, but they always had the stipulation that in exceptional circumstances, in order to keep families together, children younger than 5 could go out. So the idea to keeping siblings together was actually quite, it was something that they'd had considered and tried their best to maintain.
And if we can just scroll on down, you say that you, in your thesis, dealt with a number of other issues relevant to the consideration of how they were treated on arrival in Australia, and I'm not going to go into that. And you make a fair enough point, Doctor, that you did. Well, we're very grateful for the work that you've provided to the inquiry. Your original notes and letters that you based your thesis on are no longer in existence. You could have hardly foreseen that you would be sitting in Banbridge in 2014, yes, some 20 years later, talking about the work that you did. But can I just in conclusion say that we're very grateful for the work that you did, and it has proved very helpful to the inquiry. Okay. So I have no further questions for you, but the panel members may wish to ask you something.
Thank you.
Dr. Murray, thanks very much. That's very helpful, and your thesis has been very interesting to read. And I'm aware it is 20 years ago, but just to ask, the issue of consent, because in your thesis and in your statement you indicate that the Catholic Welfare Council talked about Australia House, the children being interviewed, and that's different from what we hear. And if we set aside the notion of informed consent, if you're talking about a 5-year-old, but is there anything you can say about that, about these interviews? Is there anything you find out in your research about children being interviewed prior?
Certain letters or comments that I came across would indicate that they were actually interviewed and that consent was given, and if they couldn't find a parent or guardian to give consent, they would have went to a justice of the peace. But there's also a nice one where a group of boys were taken to Australia House, and when they went, they thought they were going to Australia. So they came back and said, oh, Australia's not that far at all. It's just only down the road sort of thing. So the difference had to be explained to them, the difference between Australia House and Australia. So again, they would have been at Australia House, they would have been seen by the officials there, but their own knowledge of what they were consenting to may not have been 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Did you come across information about what you might call aftercare or follow-up, where the orders and so on were keeping in touch with the children that had gone out, or putting them in touch with their families, or anything of that sort?
There were different things within different organisations as opposed to aftercare. The Fairbridge Society did want and did in fact set up a fund to help old pupils as such, and they did keep in touch, or tried to, as did the National Children's Home as far as I can ascertain. The Catholic Church, I didn't see anything. That's not to say it didn't exist though. I mean, I just say that I wasn't able to discover it.
And Bernardo's? Yeah.
Again, Bernardo's had an old boys association, or I suppose old girls as well, but they didn't do it as a matter of course, but the children were encouraged to.
And were any of them enabled to come back to this country?
Some children were actually brought back, yes. But again, my research is very skimpy on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
May I just ask one further question linked in a way to what you've just been asked, Dr. McVeigh? You referred earlier in your evidence to reports back, as it were, to the sending institution from Australia. Did you come across any instances of formal reports being sent to any of the Sisters of Nazareth homes? Because across the UK as a whole, they were taking the order as a whole, contributing a very large number of the total number of children who went.
I didn't. That's not to say again that they don't exist, but a lot of the research I was doing, the records would have been closed, and they wouldn't have been available to me at the time.
Well, we certainly haven't seen any evidence of it. I just wondered whether perhaps either in relation to them or even other institutions, Catholic institutions, you had come across it. But
not that I can recall, no.
Well, may I just reiterate the thanks to my colleagues and myself in the inquiry, because the historical background of this very complex and contentious question, it was very well set out by you, and we're very grateful to you for doing that for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There is one other witness to give evidence, but if perhaps it might be appropriate to take a very short break just before we start finish.
5 minutes or something like that.
Yes.
Very well.